Ethan Brooks never thought his journey would end this way. The storm had torn his aircraft apart, and he had crashed deep in the mountains where no maps could guide him. When he opened his eyes, he saw tall cliffs and endless forests stretching around him. His body ached, but his spirit refused to give up. He pushed himself up and walked forward, searching for signs of life. The air was clean, the water clear, yet something about the place felt untouched, like a secret hidden from the world. Hours turned into days as Ethan wandered through valleys and rivers. He lived on wild berries and streams, unsure if he would ever find his way back. The fourth day, he noticed smoke rising in the distance. Hope returned to him, and he followed it until he came to a sight that made him stop in wonder. Beyond the trees stood high stone walls, ancient and strong, surrounding a great city. The sound of bells rang softly inside, and guards stood on towers, watching with sharp eyes. Before Ethan could take another step, armed men surrounded him. Their leader, a tall soldier named Daniel, held a spear and demanded to know who he was. Ethan raised his hands, speaking calmly, telling them his name and that he was lost. They tied his hands and led him inside the gates. The streets were filled with people, dressed in old but beautiful garments, their eyes filled with both curiosity and fear as they stared at the stranger. Ethan felt their mistrust, yet he also sensed a deep order in the way the city lived. At the heart of the city stood a hall of marble and gold. Inside sat Queen Isabella, the ruler of the Hidden Kingdom. She wore a silver crown, her dark hair falling gracefully on her shoulders. Her eyes were sharp yet kind, carrying the weight of a leader who had seen both peace and hardship. When the guards brought Ethan before her, the hall grew silent. The people expected punishment, for strangers were not welcome in their land. The queen looked at Ethan for a long moment, as if trying to read his soul. She asked him where he came from. He told her about his crash, his lost path, and his search for survival. His voice carried no lies, only the truth of a man stranded and alone. Some in the court demanded his execution, saying he could be a spy or a curse. Others urged banishment. But Isabella raised her hand, silencing them all. She said his eyes carried honesty, and she would not let fear rule her judgment. Instead of ordering his death, she commanded that he be given food, water, and shelter. The hall erupted in whispers, for it was rare for the queen to show mercy to an outsider, yet her decision was final. Ethan bowed his head, grateful beyond words, though he knew many in the city would continue to see him as a threat. That night, Ethan sat in a quiet chamber overlooking the kingdom. He thought of home, of the world beyond the mountains, and of the strange twist of fate that had brought him here. The city lights flickered below, voices echoed in the streets, and he realized he had entered a place untouched by time. Somewhere deep inside, he felt his life would never be the same again. The queen, alone in her chamber, thought about the man who had appeared from the sky. Something about him unsettled her, yet also stirred her heart. She wondered if destiny had brought him to her gates. She did not know that the choice she made that day would change the fate of her kingdom forever. The days passed slowly, and Ethan began to see the life of the hidden city. At first, the people watched him from a distance, whispering and pointing whenever he walked near. Many of them feared him, while others looked at him with silent curiosity. He did not blame them, for he was a stranger who had fallen from the sky. Still, he tried to show kindness wherever he went, hoping they would see he meant no harm. Queen Isabella ordered that Ethan be given small tasks, so that he could repay the shelter and food he was receiving. He helped the farmers in the fields outside the walls, carrying water and tending to animals. Though the work was hard, he never complained. The farmers noticed his strength and his patience. One day, when a heavy cart broke loose and threatened to crush a young boy, Ethan rushed forward and pulled the boy to safety. The boy's mother wept with relief, and for the first time someone in the city smiled at him. News of this reached the queen, and she began to see that her decision to spare his life might not have been a mistake. Still, the council warned her that his presence was dangerous. Daniel, the soldier who had first captured him, remained suspicious and often followed Ethan from a distance. Ethan noticed, but did not speak of it. He believed trust could not be forced, only earned. One afternoon, a storm broke over the valley. The river that ran through the city swelled with rain and soon threatened to flood the lower streets. Panic spread among the people as water poured over the banks. Ethan, seeing the danger, did not wait for orders. He gathered men to build barriers with stones and wood. His voice carried strength and direction, and though some hesitated, others followed. For hours he worked beside them, his hands bleeding, his clothes soaked, his muscles straining against the rising waters. The queen arrived at the riverbank to see him leading the effort. He waded into the current, pulling children to safety and guiding the frightened villagers to higher ground. The guards tried to stop him, fearing he would be swept away, but he refused to leave until everyone was safe. At last, when the flood slowed, the people cheered for the first time. They saw not a stranger, but a man who cared for them as if they were his own. That night, Queen Isabella invited him to the hall once more. She asked him why he had risked his life for people who still doubted him. Ethan simply answered that it was the right thing to do. Life was precious, and no man should stand by when others were in danger. His words struck her heart with quiet force. She realized that his courage was not for glory or reward, but for simple human duty. Slowly, the walls around her heart began to lower. She spoke to him about the history of the kingdom, about the generations who had lived hidden in the valley, away from the world beyond the mountains. He listened with deep respect, and in return, he told her of the vast lands outside, of cities with tall buildings and oceans that stretched forever. She was amazed by his stories, though part of her feared the world he described. It sounded both wondrous and dangerous. Days turned into weeks. The queen began to walk with Ethan in the gardens at dusk. They spoke of duty, of loneliness, and of dreams they never told anyone else. He saw the burden she carried as ruler, the endless weight of responsibility. She saw the quiet sorrow in him, the longing for a place where he truly belonged. In those quiet walks a bond began to grow, one that neither could deny. But whispers spread in the court. Some nobles claimed the queen was too close to the stranger. Others said he was casting a spell on her judgment. Marcus Hale, a noble with sharp ambition, spoke boldly in council that the queen's favor for Ethan was dangerous. He demanded the man be sent away before he caused more division. The queen answered firmly that Ethan had saved lives and earned his place. Her voice silenced the chamber, but in secret, anger grew in Marcus's heart. Ethan, unaware of the storm brewing in politics, continued to live each day with honesty. He worked in the fields, helped repair the streets, and spoke kindly to the people. Some still turned away, but more and more greeted him with nods and smiles. For the first time since his crash, he felt a sense of belonging. He did not know that this fragile peace would soon be tested in ways he could never imagine. The peace of the kingdom began to break. Though Ethan had won the hearts of many by his courage, there were others who saw him as a danger. Among them was Marcus Hale, a noble who long desired more power. He believed the queen's growing trust in Ethan was a threat to his influence. In secret, he gathered those who disliked the stranger, whispering that Ethan was an outsider who would bring ruin to their way of life. Rumors spread quickly through the city. Some said Ethan planned to open the gates to outsiders. Others claimed he sought to charm the queen for his own gain. Though many who had seen his good deeds refused to believe such words, doubt crept into the minds of others. The council grew restless, and the pressure on Queen Isabella mounted each day. Ethan felt the change in the air. The stares of the people grew sharper, and the greetings he once received became fewer. He continued to work as before, but he knew whispers followed him wherever he went. Still, he chose silence over anger, believing that truth would win over time. Yet deep inside, he felt uneasy. He had lived through storms before, and he sensed another was coming. One evening, as the sun fell behind the mountains, soldiers came to his chamber. Daniel, the soldier who had always distrusted him, announced that Ethan was to appear before the council. Ethan did not resist. He walked with steady steps, though he did not know what awaited him. When he entered the great hall, the air was heavy with tension. The nobles sat in rows, their faces stern. At the center, Queen Isabella sat on her throne, her eyes calm but shadowed by concern. Marcus stood tall before the council. He spoke loudly, accusing Ethan of deceiving the queen and plotting against the kingdom. He claimed Ethan was a danger, a man who had appeared from nowhere and gained too much favor too quickly. He demanded that Ethan be banished or executed before he could bring disaster. His words filled the hall and many nodded in agreement. Ethan stood quietly, letting the accusations pour over him. When the queen asked if he wished to answer, he raised his head and spoke. His voice was steady, though his heart was heavy. He told them he had no plan of betrayal, that all he ever did was to repay the mercy shown to him. He reminded them of the flood of the children he had saved, of the hours he spent in their fields and streets. He said he wished for nothing but peace, and if his presence brought fear, he would leave with no anger in his heart. The hall fell silent. His words touched some, but Marcus pressed harder. He declared that Ethan's speech was clever, that his kindness was only a mask. He urged the queen to see reason and protect her throne. The council murmured in agreement, and it seemed the tide was turning against Ethan. For the first time, he felt that his fate was no longer in his own hands. Then Queen Isabella rose. Her eyes moved across the hall, from the nobles to the guards, till they rested on Ethan. Her voice rang clear, silencing all others. She said she had watched his actions, not his words, and in them she saw truth. She said he had risked his life not once but many times for her people, asking for nothing in return. She looked at Marcus and declared that fear would not guide her judgment. Then she turned to Ethan and spoke the words that echoed through the hall. She said, "I will not let you go, human." The nobles gasped, and the court shook with voices. Some shouted in anger, others in surprise. Marcus's face darkened with rage, for the queen's words had shattered his plan. Ethan stood frozen, his heart struck by the weight of her declaration. He had never heard such words before, words that bound him to her in front of all. In that moment, he understood that his life had taken a path he could never turn away from. The council meeting ended in turmoil. Some left in anger, others in awe. Ethan was taken back to his chamber, but his mind was restless. He thought of the queen's courage, of the risk she had taken for him. He knew her words would not end the storm, but would instead fan the fire of rebellion. As night fell, he stood at the window, watching the torches burn in the city below. The kingdom was changing, and so was his place in it. What lay ahead he could not yet see, but he knew the trials were only beginning. The queen's words spread through the city like fire. Some saw them as a sign of courage, others as a sign of weakness. Marcus Hale did not forgive the humiliation he suffered in the council. He began to gather soldiers who were loyal to him, whispering that the queen had lost her judgment and was being controlled by a stranger. In hidden rooms and dark corners, he planned a rebellion. Ethan did not know all that Marcus was preparing, but he could feel the tension in the air. Guards watched him with harder eyes, and people spoke in hushed voices as he passed. Yet he remained steady. He'd worked with the farmers, helped repair broken streets, and spoke calmly to those who doubted him. He wanted to show that his loyalty was not a mask. Still, the storm was rising. One night, as the moon shone over the valley, Marcus struck. His soldiers surrounded the palace, their banners raised high. Torches lit the dark, and the sound of steel filled the air. Cries of alarm rang through the city as people fled to their homes. The queen stood tall in her hall, her crown shining under the flames as loyal guards formed a wall around her. Ethan, hearing the clash of weapons, rushed to her side. He found the palace gates under attack. The rebels were strong, but Ethan's voice carried power. He called the loyal guards together, telling them to hold the line, to protect the queen no matter the cost. They followed him, for though he was a stranger, his courage gave them strength. Side by side, they fought against the wave of rebels. The clash was fierce, and the night echoed with cries and the ring of blades. In the middle of the battle, Ethan saw Marcus himself. The noble rode a black horse, shouting that the throne was his by right. His words stirred his men, and they fought with fury. Ethan knew that if Marcus broke through, the queen would fall. He gathered a small group of loyal men and led them through the smoke and fire to strike at the heart of the rebellion. The fight was brutal. Ethan's body ached, his hands burned, but he pressed on. At one moment he saw an assassin slip past the guards, moving swiftly toward the queen. Without thinking, Ethan threw himself forward, blocking the blade with his arm and driving the attacker to the ground. Pain shot through him, but he did not stop. He rose again and stood before Isabella, blood on his sleeve, his breath heavy. She looked at him with both fear and pride, knowing he had saved her life. Hours passed, and the battle raged across the palace grounds. Flames lit the night sky, and the city trembled under the roar of war. Ethan led charge after charge, rallying the defenders each time they began to falter. His voice gave them courage, his actions gave them hope. Slowly, the tide began to turn. The rebels, once strong, began to break under the weight of loyalty and courage. At last, as dawn broke over the mountains, the palace still stood. The rebels had been pushed back, their banners torn, their numbers falling. Yet Marcus did not flee. With his pride burning hotter than the fire around him, he drew his sword and challenged Ethan. The queen watched in silence, knowing this moment would decide the future of her kingdom. Ethan stepped forward, weary but unbroken. He accepted the challenge, not for glory, but for the people who had begun to trust him, and for the queen who had declared she would not let him go. Their swords met with a sharp sound, and the fight began. Marcus fought with rage, his strikes heavy and wild. Ethan fought with calm strength, his movements steady and clear. The duel carried across the courtyard, each blow shaking the hearts of those who watched. The final strike came when Ethan turned Marcus's fury against him, disarming him with a swift move. Marcus fell to the ground, his sword clattering on the stones. The guards seized him, and the battle was ended. Cheers rose from the defenders, and for the first time in many nights, hope filled the air. Ethan stood in silence, his chest rising with heavy breath. He looked at the queen, who stepped forward with eyes full of gratitude. She knew the kingdom had been saved because of him, yet she also knew the struggle was not over. The wounds of war would take time to heal, and the people would need guidance. But for now the throne still stood, and she still wore her crown. Ethan lowered his head, knowing his place was no longer that of an outsider. He had fought for the queen, for the people, and for the kingdom. Whatever came next, his fate was bound to hers, and nothing could change it. The morning after the battle was quiet. Smoke rose slowly from the palace grounds, and the streets were filled with the sounds of people clearing rubble and tending to the wounded. The sun broke through the clouds, painting the valley in soft light. For the first time in many days, peace touched the kingdom, yet the memory of war was fresh, and its scars would not fade easily. Ethan walked among the people, his arm bound in cloth from the wound he had taken. Children ran to him, calling his name, while their parents bowed their heads in respect. Many reached out to thank him for saving their families, for standing when others might have fled. Ethan answered each with a quiet nod. He felt no pride, only relief that the city still stood. Queen Isabella called for the council to meet once more. The hall was filled with nobles, guards, and citizens who wished to see what would happen next. Marcus Hale, now a prisoner, stood in chains at the side of the chamber. His rebellion had failed, his voice silenced by his own greed. Still, his eyes burned with hatred as he glared at Ethan and the queen. The queen rose and spoke to her people. She reminded them of the trials they had faced, of the flood, of the rebellion, and of the courage that had brought them through. She told them that fear had nearly divided them, but strength and loyalty had saved them. Then her voice grew firm as she spoke of Ethan. She said that he had come to them as a stranger, that many had doubted him, yet he had risked his life again and again for the kingdom. She declared that without him, the throne would have fallen. The hall grew silent, all eyes turning to Ethan. He felt the weight of their gaze, unsure of what to say. He had never sought honor or recognition. All he had done was what he believed was right. But before he could speak, the queen stepped down from her throne and walked toward him. Her crown glimmered in the light as she stopped in front of him. She said, "I will not let you go, human." The words echoed like a promise, binding him not by chains but by choice. The people gasped, for a queen's word was law. In that moment, Ethan was no longer an outsider. He was claimed by the queen herself, not as a prisoner, but as one who belonged. The hall erupted in voices. Some cheered, some wept, and others bowed in acceptance. Even those who once doubted him could not deny the truth of what they had seen. Ethan had become a part of their story, woven into the fate of the kingdom. Marcus shouted in fury, but his voice was drowned out by the sound of the people. His rebellion had ended, and his power was gone. In the days that followed, the city began to heal. Homes were rebuilt, fields restored, and the wounds of battle tended with care. Yes. Ethan worked beside the people as he always had, though now they welcomed him with open hearts. The children followed him through the streets, and the elders offered him blessings. He had gained what he never thought possible, a place to belong. The queen often walked with him in the gardens as the sun set. They spoke of the past, of the battles they had survived, and of the future that lay before them. She told him that the kingdom would always remember his courage, and he told her that he had only followed the truth in his heart. Their bond grew stronger with each passing day, not built on duty alone, but on trust and respect. One evening, as the city lights flickered below, the queen stood beside him on the balcony. She said that the kingdom was no longer just hers to carry, but theirs together. She asked him to remain, not as a guest, but as part of her life and her rule. Ethan felt the weight of her words, and for the first time, he did not feel lost. He felt home. The story of the queen and the man who had fallen from the sky became legend. Songs were sung of their courage, of the battles they faced, and of the love that bound them. For generations, children would hear the tale of the queen who proclaimed her claim, and the man who chose to stay by her side. Through it all, one truth remained clear. The queen had kept her promise. She had said, "I will not let you go, human," and she never did.